Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Performance Talk. My name is Joe Gordon. My guest today is Troy Taylor, and we're gonna go right to Troy here in a second. Partner is Chris Costa. He won't be here with us today, but you guys know Chris. Sometimes I'm gone, sometimes he's gone, so we cover for each other. But Troy, how are you? How are you doing, man?
I'm doing great. It's a crisp full morning here in Park City, but I'm doing great.
Okay, Park City, Utah, right?
Yeah, Park City, Utah, up in the mountains.
Okay. Yeah, I bet that's pretty crisp. I'm in Texas, so it's pretty near 90 already.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, pretty standard. Yeah, yeah. Fall has definitely hit here. We're getting ready for ski season.
Okay, well, outstanding. So the way we usually start these things off is tell the audience and everybody listening a little bit about yourself and how you got into this performance world, maybe as an athlete, as an instructor, or whatever.
Yeah, not as an athlete actually. Well, not as a good athlete, I would say. Loved playing sports growing up. Loved everything related to that. Honestly, wasn't very talented and probably didn't have that much dedication back in the day. But loved it. So essentially, with that, and not being great student at school, but quite liking sport, quite liking biology and physiology, and those being things, I went on to do an undergraduate in sports science.
Okay.
We're talking late 90s now. So I've started personal training for a little bit, doing some membership sales, health club stuff, and
Right.
and things like that. Didn't really find my passion doing that. So sort of decided I had to go back to university, honestly, to find it a little more, buy some time before I had to realize what I was going to do with my life. And while I was doing my master's degree, I'm British, by the way,
Right.
that's the accent,
Gotcha.
over in England. I did my master's at a school called Loughborough University, which
Right.
is probably the most famous British school for sports science. And when I was there doing a master's, a lot of the Olympic teams trained out of that university.
Okay.
And so I got to volunteer for the British Olympic swim team. Um, Volunteered 6, 12, 18 hours a week, taking heart rates, lactates, working with some of the coaches, understanding some of the physiology that was going on there. This would be in the lead up to the 2004 Olympics in
Okay.
Athens. Loved it. Figured, oh, that would be cool. I'd love to build this job in sport. And was fortunate to get a job at another university straight out of that master's degree, working with some British track and field athletes, some university level athletes, some EPL sports teams, professional sports teams. And then for the next 20 years, I kind of crisscrossed the globe as a physiologist, a sports scientist, a strength and conditioning coach, and later as a high performance director and a director of science and medicine. Ended up working for Team GB, Team Canada, and Team USA across probably 12 different sports, 7 Olympic Games. I got to work with some incredible Olympic medalists. And then nearly 4 years ago, I made the switch over to tonal, and sort of bringing some of this high level performance stuff into essentially consumer level fitness device. So that's the abbreviated version.
Right. That's there's a bunch there that I want to start to unpack here a little bit. But let's talk about your time as a performance coach. We talked to a lot of coaches, we talked to a lot of directors and stuff on the podcast. But let's start with your time as a coach and when you first, you had your internships and your initial jobs and those kind of things. Talk to our younger professionals a little bit about what the trials and tribulations were back when you started.
Yeah. So if we go back to early 2000s,
Right.
in Britain, but probably anywhere in the world, maybe with the exception of Australia and possibly Eastern Europe or Russia or somewhere like that, sports science was still in its very much
Yeah.
its infancy.
Yeah.
The British lottery funding, which is what funds a lot of the British Olympic sport, started in '97, and so money started coming in the late '90s, early 2000s, post Sydney Olympics is when really it started to take off, and so I took that internship. I didn't really realize it at the time, but The head coach was a guy called Bill Sweetman, who's one of the most famous swim coaches ever out
Right.
of Australia. There was a bunch of high-level coaches who come in, really well, well respected and were very knowledgeable sports scientists. A guy called Bob Treffine,
Okay.
who was there. And so at the time, I didn't really have an appreciation for like these are legends in the fields of
Right.
swimming. I swam a little bit growing up, but I wasn't certainly into it.
Right.
But so back in the early days, it was very much about like learning. The entire system was trying to learn how to have professional coaches, to be honest.
Right.
Like the professionalization of Olympic sport really would only just recently happened, and then these support services, strength and conditioning
Right.
coach, sports scientist,
Right.
physiologist, dietitian. These were all brand new roles. And so there was a lot of kind of figuring it out, a lot of learning on the job. Had these very high level people of experience that had done it for the Australian Olympic team
Right.
for Sydney. But pretty much anyone like myself was a 22-year-old, university graduate, student intern. We were learning on the job. Very much so, of learning the level it would take. So I would say that was probably fairly similar for the first 4 or 6 years of my career. Was very much about like this was the infancy of sports science as an applied practice in Olympic sport, of having full support teams to do that. And so a lot of that was a lot of mistakes made, a lot of, I would say, less clearly defined roles,
Yeah. Yeah.
in terms of,
Yeah.
I would class myself back then as a strength and conditioning coach, a sports scientist, a physiologist, and an assistant coach,
Yeah.
all in the same
Yeah.
hat. Like
All. Yeah.
there was only 3 or 4 of us, and we did all the jobs that were needed to be able to do. There wasn't the level of structure that might be in
Right.
like a high level, high performance team now. Um, and that's actually one of the reasons why I took a job after the Athens Games with US Olympic ski and snowboarding. Not because I was a great skier or snowboarder. I did love it. I'd been twice, I think, as a kid. But they had one of the most robust systems for sports science in the world at that time. Guy by the name of Andy Walsh,
Yeah.
who later on to Red Bull, had set that up in the late 90s. And there were a bunch of Australians too. But they were running this really high level performance team. And that was one of the reasons I went, was to try and learn, like, how does this actually operate in a system that's been running for 6 or 8 years, rather than trying to figure it out on the job.
Right. I will tell you, I'm a little bit ahead of you on that curve, not by knowledge or anything like that, but just by years.
Yeah,
Just because I've been around a little bit longer. But I know back in 2000, I was coming out of a military career, and we measured everything
yeah,
and did everything. So um, in my strength and conditioning work and in my performance work and all that stuff, I know we were trying to figure out what are the measurables, what are the things that are going to dictate for each sport, if we're making progress in our training or not.
yep.
That was around.
20 years later, still trying to figure some of
Yeah,
those out.
yeah. So that's between 2004 and 2000. See, I retired in 2004, 2014. So we're going back and forth with all that. Where we landed, I think, is where a lot of people landed. Really, is it's a team effort. You can't do, even as the sports scientist, you can't do all the measuring and all the data collecting and all that. You can't do that yourself. You got to have your nutritionist do some, your strength people do some, and have that. I'm trying to lead into the performance teams that you've worked
Mhm.
with, and you know, how do you see meshing all that together, or how have you meshed that together? Give us a little bit of an idea for maybe someone who's in that spot right now. You
Yeah.
know,
Just a comment on the data collection side and where it is. I think it goes through ebbs and flows of where we're trying to capture absolutely everything, and then trying to figure out what's important almost after the fact.
right,
And then times of where you're like being really specific. I know this matters, therefore I measure it, and these are my key variables. And over my 20 years, probably similar to you, I've seen the waves of different teams
right.
and what we try to do at different stages. And
Would
I
would
don't know
you,
if there's necessarily a true
would you,
right
would
and
you say
wrong.
it's the coach's philosophy, what they think? You know,
I think it's a little bit of coach's philosophy. I think like a lot of it is shaped by the trends. and what they see the best in the world doing at that particular time.
Yeah.
And also the proliferation of tools to be able
Yeah,
to
there's a
capture
bunch.
data, right?
There's a bunch of stuff out there,
Yeah,
man.
GPS,
Yeah.
second spectrum, whatever it might
Right.
be. We have a ton more data. In the late 90s, early 2000s, like I was measuring heart rates on swimmers, I was measuring lactates, I was measuring, for the glory of it, urine hydration
Yeah.
states.
For the glory of
Like I did my master's project in that, very glamorous.
it.
But like there was not that much. We might have some self questionnaires, kind of things, but there wasn't the level of data caption that was available.
Right.
Now, if I fast forward 20 years, every Olympic swimming pool would have, cameras set up to be tracking stroke rate of every person.
Yeah.
The way you track stroke rate back then is you ask the swimmer, how many strokes
Yeah.
did you take?
Yeah.
It was a lot more basic back then, and I think
Like in track, how many steps you got between those hurdles?
totally, yeah, yeah, like
How many steps
ask
are
a
you taking?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think what you to sort of align the two questions around performance teams, I think once you've seen more and more granular level of data, more and more potential insights into performance, the more and more of a support team you need to be able to do to both capture, analyze, and translate that.
Right.
And I think honestly, for I'd say a good half of my career, that's probably been where I focused my time, not necessarily on the data collection, but how do we get professionals working well together? How do
Yeah.
you get sports medicine professionals, doctors, physios, athletic therapists,
Right.
and such like physiologists, strength coaches, dietitians? How do you get them all on communicating on the same page? And I would say for a lot of my time in Britain and in Canada, I spent 2010 to 2016 as a director of science
And,
and medicine in Canada,
and
was how do we function well together and how do we help facilitate that in pursuit of helping the athlete.
yeah, the
Um,
athlete is the hub on the wheel.
yeah, everyone
We're
talks about athlete centered, but what does that actually mean and
yeah.
how do we execute that other than a graph,
Right.
or a nice diagram?
Right.
And I think that has been a large portion of the question. And I think, so to try and help answer that, how have I, or how do I think that is best done? I think it does start with a couple of different levels. It understands with like a really clear vision and understanding what are we trying to achieve, and like reaffirming that constantly again and again and again. In terms of we are all working towards something, and it's not Troy to be famous,
Right. Right.
or for the head coach to be famous, or for any of the other teams to feel like they're doing their best job. We're all working for the athlete to do the best performance that they can, hopefully step on the podium and the top step of the podium in a lot of my experience. But
Right.
like it sounds obvious, but it takes constant reaffirmation of that. So, in the middle of a season, when a strength coach gets told, hey, we're dropping down from 3 sessions a week to 2 sessions a week, for them not to be pissed off or not to feel like, oh, I'm not valuable. Like, hey, that's what the athlete needs now, because it's not about whether they, need
Right.
X, Y, or Z from you. It's about how do they get their best performance. And this is how we believe. So I think reaffirming that is important. I do think having a relatively clear understanding of a what it takes to win or a gold medal profile type thing is
Right.
a good idea. So these are two terms that are used in Britain and Canada,
Right.
come into to the US a little more, but it is an understanding of what does an athlete need to be, or a team need to be able to do technically, tactically, physiologically, psychologically, social and
Right.
emotionally, is the five I would do. But as putting KPIs, metrics, OKRs, something to them to say, hey, this is what we are trying to help to develop. Ideally, you have athlete input into that. The athlete has an understanding, hey, how do we get the best
Ideally,
performance?
yeah. That is way back in the day we called that demands of the sport.
Yeah, demands, sport demands like SDA, sport demands analysis.
And needs and requirements
Yeah,
of the athlete, and then last what the athlete wants to do. But
yeah,
it never says what the coach thinks you should do,
yeah,
or where the coach thinks you should be. It's this what are the demands and requirements of the sport first.
yeah. I think I saw a ton of that in the early 2000s, and that's what a lot of it was built on. And then 2000, mid 2000s. We seemed to get away from it a lot of the sport demands analysis, and we were just collecting data and running and kind of thing.
Yeah.
We didn't really have this like great vision. We didn't know what the
Right.
picture, the jigsaw puzzle needed to look like. And then I think I've seen, in the last, say, decade, it kind of come back the other way. And people are, okay, we understand this. And my way of contextualizing this is there is not a single gold medal profile or needs analysis for every athlete. This is getting us in the right ballpark, right?
Right.
And depending on the particular sport, it might look a little different and might be, quite structured to maybe quite loose. But, take something like I worked in Olympic rowing a fair amount. It's a relatively easy sport to do a sport demands analysis for. You can do, I think there needs to be tall. You can put some height metrics to it. You can put some wingspan metrics to it. You can put some lung capacity metrics to it. You can put some VO2 max. If you have all of those, it doesn't mean you're going to be an Olympic champion, but it means you're probably not if you're not at the level.
Right.
If you don't have a
So
VO2 of close to 70, probably not going to
yeah, it's gonna
happen.
be
Or,
yeah, it's gonna be too much for you. Let's if I put that in the a couple of sports better known in America but across the world as well. But basketball and wrestling.
yep,
I mean, come on, if you're 6'7" with a wingspan of nearly 7 foot, let's put you on the basketball court. Let's see what you got.
yeah.
You know it.
Yeah, there's some demands of that, and you can get like take basketball, like you can get understand like broadly what does it take, and
Yeah.
then you can start getting position specific.
Right.
Unfortunately, I actually Eric from P3 Peak Performance Project at Santa Barbara just presented to our team yesterday. I don't want to share anything that's confidential, but
Right. That's
you
fine.
start looking, you can start putting data to what a big needs to look like, what a guard needs to
Right.
look
Right.
like,
Right.
both physiologically but also biomechanically. So, like, what's their deceleration need to look like? What does their sort of acceleration need to look like? And then, you can start with a lot of the data, second spectrum, or whatever the current tools that are being
Right.
used, decision making tools, execution. We know 3-point percentages, we know 2-point percentages. We can start with machine learning, start to understand, like, hey, did they make quote unquote the best pass? Like, how often do they make that pass? In kind of thing. And so you can start putting this kind of an understanding to it. And so if you've got clear vision, we want to win the NBA championship, or we want to create this team that plays a certain type of way that we believe is going to help us win the championship. Then we've got team and individual gold medal profiles or championship profiles to understand that. Then it's about bridging the gap, assess where we're at, assess where we need to be. How do we
Fill
fill
it
the
in.
gap?
Yeah. There you go.
There's a differential. What's the delta, and how do we start working on that? And then that comes down to philosophy, coaching,
Yep.
like having clear plans, and sort of assessing. This period of time we plan to work on this. We made progress. We didn't make progress. Can we now put this on maintenance? And we've built enough, or do we need to continue to work on this? But essentially, then it's getting into like almost project planning
It's
of how you help the athlete develop.
with that leads us right into um, leading those teams along this road to improving performance for the athletes, and getting those nutritionists and doctors and everybody to work together to buy into a um, in sports or in professions where not really team is not really built into the whole thing.
Mhm.
If you're in med school, you're grinding that bad baby out by yourself most of the time.
Yep.
And same way with other professions along the way. But then when you come out into the world and the sun shines on you, you realize, hey, we got to all work together. And we talked about the team. Now talk about leading the team as a high performance director, you know, performance, whatever we're calling them today.
Yeah. Integrated support team lead. I've heard
Yeah.
it called in Canada. Yeah, yeah. There's all different kind of names.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think number one, it starts off with hiring people that not just give lip service, but actually want to learn and be part of a team. I think you have to start
That's a
there.
good point.
Like,
Yeah.
and that will immediately eliminate some really, really high quality candidates. some people that are exceptional, that run their own business, run incredible like summer camp strength and conditioning, like
Right.
college prep or NFL combine prep.
Yeah.
They're great practitioners, but might not necessarily be the best person to bring into your team full time.
Right.
Um,
Right.
some of those people are great team players
Yeah.
too. I don't
Yeah.
want to
Oh,
cast any
I
brush.
know some on both sides of the coin.
Yeah,
So it's nature of the profession, I think.
yeah, but I think you have to start with hiring people that want to be part of a team. I would say the other tactic that I found extremely useful is hiring people or developing people that want to become, the term would be expert generalists. This idea
Ah,
of a
yeah,
T
yeah,
shaped
yeah.
employee, in that an expert generalist is someone who has a deep depth of knowledge in one or more topic areas. So let's say I am a physiologist. I know a lot about human physiology and training.
Right.
Probably was a physiologist back in the day. My tea is not very deep in that long line anymore because I don't spend as much time there.
Right.
But you want to hire someone that has deep expertise, because you do need deep expertise to stand on top sets of podiums, to win
Right.
Olympic championships.
Right.
You can't just be a be all. You do need deep expertise. But then the T shape, the wide, the breadth of knowledge is someone that wants to learn and understand, not scope creep, but learn and understand. Hey, what does a physical therapist, how do they look at this problem? What does a dietitian, how do they look at this problem? Because if you have someone that's T-shaped, what should happen if they want to be a team member is they realize they only have a relatively small depth of knowledge in these topic areas,
Right.
and it gives you more respect for the other person opinion rather than less. It gives you an ability to constructively challenge conversations, but rather than being, well, like I as a strength coach think core stability is this, and I as a physical therapist think core stability is that, and there's no common language and
Right.
communication
Exactly. That
style.
common language or that baseline language,
Yeah,
yeah.
you have someone that, hey, I know a bit about how you think about this, and you know a bit how I think about this, and this is the pros and cons of my version, and this is the pros and cons, and it allows for better conversations. Not everyone getting on all the time, not everyone agreeing with all the right concepts, but it gives you a platform for understanding what conversations you have, and rather than just being like almost ego based or like my discipline knows better than your discipline,
Yeah.
it's a lot more constructive. And so I think that's essential. If you get good employees that have a wanting to work together and then have a knowledge and understanding, I'd say 90% of a high performance director's job is like relatively easy. When you don't do them, a high performance director's job is horrible because all you're doing is try and firefight interdisciplinary issues
Yeah. Yeah.
between, whoever it might be. It tends to be science and medicine, right? That tends to be the classical. Medicals want to be too conservative. Strength coaches want to be too, aggressive, and we can't ever have these conversations. If you can get those two baselines, I think you're in a much better spot for the conversations which actually count, which are, hey, we've got an athlete with a deficit, a problem, an injury, whatever it might
Right.
be. How do we collaborate together? So that's sort of like one and two. The third way that I think, particularly in rehab, and US Ski and Snowboard did an exceptional job of this, not because of me, but because of the staff that were there. Jillian Bauer, who's the high performance director
Yeah.
now, and Callum Butterfield, who I want to say is at the Milwaukee Bucks as their strength and conditioning rehab coach over there now. They set up an incredible framework for return to snow, return performance, return to podium level
Yeah.
stuff. Lots of
Yeah.
injuries in skiing and snowboarding, one of the
Right.
sports I work in, lots of ACLs, lots of 12, 18-month rehabbers. But very like, hey, we always start with like, where are we working back from? A lot of the time in these longer rehabs and longer phases where there's these interdisciplinary stuff is like, it's kind of ambiguous of
Right.
like, how long am I going to be in this stage for? It's like, it's very clear. We're working back from where we need to be, which is that sport demands analysis, that
Right.
gold medal profile. If we go back 18 months from that, okay, in the next 2 months, we are working on this. These are the competencies we need to be able to have you to
Right.
progress, because athletes love progression. They're very used to metrics and things they need to hit.
Yes.
And the
Yes.
rehab stage, it gets taken all away. And from a staff perspective, it gets very subjective very quickly. And
Right.
not saying that subjectivity doesn't have a place, because
No,
it does.
I know exactly what you mean though. Yeah.
But yeah, you start getting those, hey, okay, first stage of rehab is like, I don't know, let's say it's becoming weight bearing. We can
Right.
do 50% weight better. What are the metrics we need to be able to do to progress? The athlete now understands what they need to do. Biological healing, it's going to take 12, 18, whatever weeks it is.
Right.
But there is a timeline associated, and then we measure that. Did we get the healing that we want to? We image or we do whatever.
Right.
We can start building this platform, which I think has been really good for the athletes to progress, and understand what that rehab looks like, but actually for the practitioners to understand where their roles are also going to play.
Yeah.
Physical therapist early in that is like the major player.
Yeah.
Strength and
Yeah.
conditioning coach for the most part is doing upper body, in a lower body injury, upper body maintenance, maybe non-injured a limb, kind of stuff, but is supporting the therapist.
Right.
Then later stage rehab, physical therapy is more just making sure things are right, and the strength coach is doing a lot more work.
Right.
And so like
It's
you get
when,
to
and
understand how your role plays a role in this overall
I
performance.
know back in the early days, and we'll call Will for a like space to call the early days. We'll say early 2000s, but because before that it was the dark ages, man. I'm telling
Yeah,
you.
that's just one man in his dark, just trying to do what you can.
When so in the early 2000s, when I was doing a lot of work in the rehab centers, and I just tried to stay current with what rehab had going on because I was a strength guy.
Yep.
But with one of the, I was in Carolina at the time, and in South Carolina, and one of the local rehab facilities that did a lot with the younger athletes there, the high school and young college athletes. We got together and we figured out, that framework you're talking about, and we went from what I really call, average ACL recovery time to really kind of successful. I can count 22 athletes that during a period of time came through there, and out of the 22, probably 18 to 20 had a successful return to sport, and the others didn't for various reasons.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's pretty good. But we thought, okay, coming in, the strength issue really comes into play at about the 12-week mark or somewhere in there for an ACL. So they need to start that focus or that transition to strength work. The doctors, said healing has been done. The lead PT has said, okay, functionally they're in good shape. That, weight bearing, full flexibility, the whole thing. So I'm going through and I'm making your point. I'm hoping to help make your point that framework is critical.
Yeah. Yeah, it just gives you a framework. It gives you a not an exact map, but it gives you an understanding of where you need to be, where's right on track, how to address things early if they're not on track. Like, hey, you're off track, and maybe it's just a slow healer,
Yeah,
or maybe it's not.
but it
But
allows
it
you
gives you
to.
an opportunity to have the conversation with the athlete and with the support staff to understand, hey, we don't seem to be tracking in the same way that we can. um, we at Ski and Snowboard, like over the years, they became exceptional at maintaining muscle mass, became almost a non-issue. Like, before we used to see like muscle wastage, and
Yeah,
we
yeah,
were always
yeah.
about thigh girths and getting back, and we do MRIs and other kind of advanced techniques to make sure that muscle mass was coming back. It's like by the time I was halfway through, and probably even before I joined, muscle mass was not an issue. They would really well strike. Like, we can do BFR to maintain it. We can get early on, like we can make
Yeah.
sure we have like enough protein supplementation. We know what the right protocols are to get straight. Like, muscle mass was by 2015, 16 wasn't an
Right.
issue.
There's a
Strength,
whole lot of preoperative work was done
totally
as well.
pre-op work. Yeah,
So
overbuild it. There's
yeah,
stuff we can do. Like,
yeah.
we actually started delaying some surgeries a little bit, particularly on like in skiing and snowboarding. You don't just see an ACL, you see an ACL, MCL,
PCL,
PCL,
yeah.
meniscus. Like, you're
Get this,
getting the
get them.
big knees. When I say 12 to 18 months, it's because it wasn't just a straight ACL.
Right.
You're getting you've got this 2 meter long lever that's twisting. It's
Yeah.
not great on your knees. But we delay things because we know we need the swelling to come down. We need some healing to work out. But we can work in that time.
Right.
So muscle mass became non-issue. Strength, we actually became really quite good
Got
at.
better
Okay,
at, did you?
week 12, 16, whatever it might be, like, we can start progressing this, and we've got a lot of, We could do eccentric overloading. There's ways that we could
Right.
manipulate training to get strength back. And so by the time that they were ready, we'd be great. Where when I left, where the big focus was, and I know is continued, is two things: rate of force development. How do we get power back quickly? Like not just peak power, but rate of force development power.
Right.
We really struggled to do that. And our thinking is because we were so far away from it for so long. So I don't
I
want to
can.
say this is their plan because I've been out 4 years, but certainly we're starting introducing what safe power stuff moving quickly can we do earlier? Can
Yeah,
we
I can
keep
see
that
that.
neurological kind of component in? And so that's really interesting conversations between therapists and strength coaches and everyone
Yeah,
else
that
involved in.
that neurological piece,
Yeah, huge.
yeah, and getting that thing, getting everything to fire
Yeah,
when and how you want it, because the
totally.
recruitment process can sometimes be, they're doing something completely different because they're injured.
Yeah,
So you have
yeah,
to,
and
so you
then
got to slow it down to speed it up, really.
yeah, and then we started playing a lot with neurocognitive training. So I think it's Dusty Grooms. I want to say out of Ohio, but had done really interesting work on sort of this idea of neurocog is a very broad term, but
Right,
of reactivity. We even got to do things like virtual reality when we were like week one of rehab. We'd strap on virtual reality
yeah,
glasses, headset Quest, like Meta Quest, of them going down a ski slope. So rather than doing quad contractions looking at their knee, because all they could do were quad contractions at that stage of post-operative, they were looking at a turn and like contract when you would turn, contract when you would turn. And so then you're not looking at your knee because
yeah.
vestibular system is known
Retraining your
rehab,
brain a little bit.
draining your brain a little bit. And so we'd use neuro rehab and particularly VR, but neurocognitive all through from super early all the way through late stage before the 2018 Olympic Games. Having athletes doing the full Olympic course in their rehab situations, particularly on one athlete that was trying to struggle to make it back for the Olympic Games. And so yeah, that component's been really interesting in rehab and really interesting from a this is not a doc or a therapist. This is a team approach to it.
Right,
There's a psychology opponent to this, sports psychologist, visualization. How do
right.
we bring that in?
That's
There's obviously PT and doctors making sure that things are safe and they're also effective. Strength coaches from how can we start working on rate of force development earlier? So you've got these kind of there. And so you're really allowed to some fun conversations that are
yeah.
hopefully impactful.
And that psychological piece is is pretty important, especially with the imaging or visualization.
Yeah.
Um, we're even starting younger athletes, to get them used to moving and to help correct. I hate to say bad movement, but erroneous movement, because I mean they get in some bad habits. When you're younger and you're not really being developed, you kind of do what you think you see,
Yep.
but what you think you see isn't always what you should be doing. So that's all young athletes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so so we try to figure that piece out and get them, you know, cognitively involved, as you say, so that they do some more, so they can do some additional work there. Human performance. I'll come back to that one. Then now in the future, we'll talk about that closer to the end. Let's talk about AI, man.
Sure. Yeah,
I,
didn't you want to talk about it? The whole topic?
let's just throw it up on the table and talk about AI.
Man, I think it's obviously it's a super interesting space.
Right.
I think about it from two angles. I can think about it from the elite sport performance angle, and I can also think about from the consumer angle because I
Okay.
think they're slightly related but slightly different. And the reason I think that they're slightly different is the level of precision that you need in the consumer angle is larger. Like you don't need as finite precision. You're not talking
Okay.
fractions of a hundredth of a second is the difference
Right.
between winning or losing or kind of there. You've got more leeway is the reality.
Okay.
And you have a ton more data. I'll give you, from Tonal, my current company, the device behind,
Okay.
like we have hundreds of thousands of users training millions of training sessions, creating billions of sets,
Yeah.
tens of billions of reps, and then we capture every one of those at 50 hertz. Like your data set is just, you're talking
Humongous.
true
Yeah.
big data. Like
Yeah.
we're 250 billion pounds, 35 million trainings. I even forget the numbers; they
Wow.
increases every time. But like, it's just enormous. So you've got this enormous data set, and you want to give good answers, precision answers, but it doesn't have to be to the tenth of a second
Right.
answers.
Right.
That combination really powerful, and we can talk a lot more around that. Elite sport, for the most part, in the sports that I've worked in, we have both the opposite of those. We have small data sets, relatively speaking, in the true like AI type of it.
Yeah.
Either that we have a lot of the data, but on very few people, like
Right.
5 people on the starting five in a basketball team, or maybe 12 across that. And the answers that we need to give are highly precise. Like,
Right.
we are already at the 99.5
Yeah.
percentile.
You're only
Um,
working on a pinhead.
yeah, and so that becomes there. And so I think that's generally, I think you're going to see a lot better and a lot more advanced in the consumer space than the elite space. Whereas elite space is definitely investing in it. It's a much harder area. I think baseball and some of the others where you are capturing bigger data are certainly, more advanced and leading that, whereas everyone else is smaller. I think the other thing that I think is important is AI is really, really good at remembering and then utilizing what you have done, right? It never forgets. Every one of those reps, I've lifted 6 million pounds on tonal, give or take. I've done, I don't know, 1,500 training sessions. I don't know how many reps that is, but every single one of those reps is collected at 50 hertz. Tonal knows my first rep, second rep, my millionth rep. It knows all of them.
You
It
have
knows my
that. You have
force. It
that
knows my
historical.
velocity. It knows a lot about that. And so it's great at questions I want to ask, remembering what happened when I did this, or what's associated when I did that. So, an example might be, let's say, just something simple, consistency. Like, what tonal, like when was I most consistent within my training? And like, what were the factors that led into that? And so it can look back in the database, or a data scientist can look back in that database
Right.
and say, oh, well, Troy was most consistent when he worked out between the hours of 7 and 8 a.m. His training sessions were 35-ish minutes long. He tended to work upper body because he's a bro. And he likes bicep curls of sets
Yeah.
8 to 12. And then you could look at it and, well, when was Troy most inconsistent? It's like, well, when his timing was wrong, when he had to do deadlifts and he didn't want to, and he was trying to do high rep sets or something like that. But it's really good at those questions and the way that you can answer them. It's just remembering and then feeding forward. But it can build models off of that. Where it struggles, it doesn't have context unless you give it context. So it only
Okay.
knows the data that's feeding the model.
Right.
And so you need to be aware of its interpretation when it's feeding that model. So it doesn't know, unless I told it, what my Aura Sleep Rings data said it was. It doesn't know that, like, my wife was, not happy with me because I didn't put out the garbage, or
Right.
like, take care of the kids, like, or do something. It doesn't know these extraneous, which all affect my training related stuff. And
Right.
so I think where the questions come in is like, there's two. There's like, how do you give it more context? How do you do data aggregation and integration
Okay.
to give it more of those contextuals? What's important for it to know? And number two is you should ask it questions and think about the answers that don't need a ton of context. Because if they need a ton of context and you haven't given it, it's not going to be great. So I think that's my broad kind of take on it. I'd say the other piece is it's great at giving you really like that expert generalist. It's great at giving you that generalist level of knowledge.
Right.
I I chat GPT or Gemini a whole bunch of questions in spaces that I don't really know that much. And
Right.
therefore I know the answer is maybe not the best, but it's going to be broadly correct. Like, you ask it to write a hypertrophy program, it's not going to be the best hypertrophy program that you've ever or I've ever written, but it's not going to be like horrible. It's
Right.
gonna have to roughly the right number of sets, reps, exercises that do that. So if I only want a relatively broad level of knowledge, it's great at getting up speed around that. But it's not necessarily great at some of the context stuff unless you give it.
Well, I think, and that's a great explanation about. artificial intelligence in this space anyway, because I think sometimes we get fooled by the word intelligence.
Yeah.
It's still artificial, guys. You know what I mean? So context is not something that you should, associate with anything that's artificial, because it's like a text message. If you don't know the person sending you the text, and you get it, and it's something a little crazy like, hey, let's get together. You don't know who that is, or what context that's in, or if it's spam, or whatever. So yeah, that's great.
I think I will say, I think you'll see more and more context being given through more data aggregation, or more like the way that Whoop does this really well is it asks its users, right, for context. Did you drink alcohol last night? Like, you log it and give it context. So, like, I think what you'll see is more of that questioning to give the models context. And maybe eventually the model itself will, without being requested, it's got enough data that knows, hey, when 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 heart rate variability does X, it's most likely because you drank alcohol, because we have this huge data set and we know
Right.
it's Saturday morning, so you Friday night, and every Friday night for 3 months you log that you have two beers, and it kind of can simulate context over time. I think you'll see that of more and more devices that are asking for that context, or you'll get more and more data aggregation between devices that will give that context.
Now see,
Your your
that's another perfect segue. I think you're batting 100 right now.
yeah.
Human performance then, now, and in the future.
Uh, I think that, like, the underlying is the same, right? How do we get the best performance out of the person in front of us? That's always the underlying question.
Right.
I think that gets clouded sometimes, and we forget that sometimes because we get so obsessed about GPS data, load management
Right.
data, like new latest strength training kind of things, latest rehab related stuff. But the goal is the same, right? That vision is helping the athlete be the best version of they can. So I think that's clear. I think if I go back in the day, um, it was rudimentary. I think we only focused on the biggest rocks, which made it really simple, but really, really probably more impactful. Like, people didn't like train that well. They didn't understand any concepts of load management or variation or
Right.
periodization. They didn't understand anything around how diet might impact on performance or how sleep might impact on performance. And so, like, the things that I think I was focusing on in the early 2000s, they were they were fairly basic. But they were really impactful. We were relatively making, let's say, impactful. I'm saying 1% changes. We were
Yeah.
making 1% increments with these. Dave Beresford back in the day, aggregation of marginal gains. They were 1%ers, right? But you actually look at them in the modern day title. It's like, I'm not looking at 1%ers anymore. In today, I'm like 0.1%ers. Like, you're
Yeah.
trying to optimize these very marginal. There's still some big ticket items, but at the top level, it's relatively finite. And so I think the things that we're trying to chase are harder to measure, harder to show value, and then you have to really think about the cost benefit analysis of them, or what is the return on your investment of doing this. And the return on investment, you can think around the ideas of, like, how much does it cost? Like, I'm going to buy the latest whatever system for tens of thousands of dollars. Oh, and by the way, you need to hire a staff member to run it. So there's financial costs for
Right.
professional sports teams. That's often not that big an issue, although performance budgets aren't always exactly what salaries are for players and things like that. There's a performance, but I think a lot more about, like, time and energy cost. What's the time and energy cost of implementing this for the staff and for the athlete? And
Right.
so if I'm chasing this and let's say it's a tenth of a percent. So if I do this new innovation, buy this new technology, do this, I'm going to improve performance by a tenth of a percent, but it's now costing athletes, I don't know, extra 10 minutes before the game, or it's costing the coaches an extra 20 minutes to review data post game days, or it's costing the sports staff an extra 2 hours to run the analysis. There's a cost to that.
Right.
Is it worth that cost? because you might be decreasing performance in another area by a lot more than a tenth of a percent
Right.
if you do that. And so I think that's the phase where a lot of the sports teams that I see are at right now is they're in that trade-off of they probably only thought about the benefit, like the return, and didn't think about the investment enough. And I think what you're seeing amongst savvier teams is a bit of a peeling back of some of the technologies to the things that are going to be the most valuable and the ones that we are comfortable with that cost benefit analysis.
Yeah, it's like
Um, I
how
think the yeah,
no, it's like how much data is too much data.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know.
and that's an individual question. To a data
Right.
scientist, there is no data that's too much data, pretty
Right.
much. And as long as you have the skills and capacities and resources to crunch that, that's great. But no good data scientist or even performance scientist is going to be showing that much data to your probably your strength coach, definitely not your head coach,
Right.
or
Better. That's not a good idea.
then it's like how do you translate that? It's not that the data is bad or not right. It's
No.
just okay. Well, like you got like the report for the internal team, and then a report for the coaches, and then a report for the player, and they are three different looking. And
Yeah.
the costs of generating all of those.
When I when I
Um,
when I think
I
about
do I do think the future. I do think AI eventually will help streamline the cost of doing some of that. As in, it might not always give us better answers, but it's going to offload a lot of the investment time that we can run. And you can already see some scripts and models that are doing that, where it's crunching a lot of data in a lot of period of time, in a quick period of time, to help us essentially minimize the investment side of the ROI. It may not. I think we always think of like it's going to give me a brand new answer.
right.
It's going to have increase my return, and it may on occasions. But I think if you think about it, how is it a tool to decrease the cost of you making that analysis or of doing that? That
Right.
I think is a much easier path to return on the investment there.
Yeah, I think along those same lines, one of the things that can help keep the team, kind of focused is if you put together, where your focus is, foundation, framework, systems. When you get out of when you get out of rhythm is what I like to call it. It's because look at what you're doing foundationally,
Yep.
or look at what you're doing when you're putting your framework together. I mean, where are the holes in your framework?
Yep.
If you have some bad pieces in there, the house is coming down.
Yep.
And then your systems. You got to put systems in so all that stuff means something because you're building the foundation of what and the framework of what, and then how's it run?
In our space to
So
fall for everything. Um,
there you go. Yeah, it is.
and so I think having a belief that can evolve over time, but a belief of how you think this should be done, what you think is important, I think allows you to look at those technologies, investments, whatever it might be, with a critical lens, and a lot less like keeping up with the Joneses.
Right.
And then, like particularly in professional sports, what you need is you need a great head coach that also believes in that, a great GM that also believes in that, and a great owner that also believes in that.
Right.
You need that through the system,
Yeah.
because
Not always
it's
easy to
fine if
get.
you and the head
Yeah.
coach believe that, but as soon as they get fired, the GM's like, well, I want to do what the Red Sox are doing, or what the Yankees are
Yeah.
doing, or what whoever else, and so that's always a constant challenge. You've got to be confident in the way that you're approaching this, and also honest to evolve. If it's not working over time, how are you adapting and evolving that? The final thing I'd say is something now working in consumer devices that I don't think I appreciated or did as much when I thought about athlete centered, as a performance practitioner, is like when your business is entirely based on your customers, right? If I don't sell tonals, or if Tonal doesn't sell tonals, and if we do sell those customers, but they churn really quickly, they stop paying us because they're not, like, the business does not exist. There's no like, oh, we had a bad season, we didn't achieve our goals. It's like
Right.
we went bankrupt,
Yeah.
because they're like, it's
Yeah.
fundamental.
Cake's
And
all
so you
done. We're
can't.
moving, honey.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It gets real quick, but it makes you really focused on, hey, which ones are doing okay? Which, I there's hundreds of thousands of them, so it's not like Joe Smith or Troy Taylor did this, but it's
Right.
like okay, you cohort people, you bucket people. You're like, these types of customers are doing great. They're engaged all the time. They're loving the platform. They're like, lifetime value is high. They're buying at high rates. They're doing this segment of customers here seem to be struggling. Why is that? What can I do from development point of view?
Right.
Now, if you were a sports team and that was an athlete, you could say, cut them. We're shipping them out.
Yeah.
From a business, you don't really
No.
want to ship too many people out. There are some people that you don't want to necessarily target towards. But if they're a customer that you think is a valuable, should be a long term, then you start thinking about, well, what services and products and features. So am I going to build for this person that's like not enjoying my platform to thrive? Think about the athlete that like is in your program that's, hey, they should be good, but it's not working. We can try beating that, like, screw with a hammer, trying to get it to go in
Right.
because that's my system. Or you can say, okay, well, I have to adapt it a little bit. And there might be times when it's too adapting, not it's that's too far outside of what we can cope with. But
Right.
if you genuinely believe that athlete or that customer, in my sense, has thing, then it's about, okay, what features, what products do I need to offer to get the performance that I want out of that person? And it makes you really think critically about that, which it's been interesting now, sort of on the other side of the, I guess, the performance technology lens.
The one of the things that I was just thinking about what you said with the consumer side and how how you're putting it all together and maybe not getting the person here or there. I've learned over the years that the greatest programs in the world only really service about 85% of the people as is. Once you roll them out, you sit down and you write your best program for your team, and it's going to service about 85%. You're going to have a percentage up here that needs a little bit more. You're going to have a percentage down here that needs a little bit less, or vice versa. So when you're when you're thinking about that, how did you take that thought process to tonal, basically?
Yeah. I think so. The broader your population you're working with, like if you're, say, working with basketball players, I think 85% is probably pretty right. In my experience in elite sport, most of them look fairly similar because they've made it to this elite level
Right.
because of they have some similarities.
Right.
Tall, move well, kind of there. The you widen your aperture there to the general population. I actually think that number decreases of what works because there's just much more variation in the population you're working with. And so I have a guess it's like more
Okay.
like 50% in the general. Hey, there's like, and when I say general population, that's about tonal consumers, because that's not even, it's a big section of the population, but it's not an incomplete. You've spent $5,000 on a piece of home fitness equipment and
Right.
you're willing to pay a subscription. You've got some bias self-selection into that type of
Right.
customer,
Right.
even within that. But we bucket, and we kind of create audiences or cohorts of people that look similar. And there's a bucket of people like probably us. They're in their 30s, 40s, or 50s. They've been resistance training for a decent chunk of time. They generally want to build or maintain muscle as their primary focus. That's me.
Right.
They also tend to be, married or cohabit. They tend to have their own home, partly hard to buy.
Right.
So there's been some consistencies around our kind of customer there. There's another type of customer that is like typically similar age group, but tends to be more female orientated, not all the time, but definitely more female, that is more focused on kind of, on weight maintenance, weight loss, get lean, sort of maintaining muscle mass while recomping. As it were, and
Okay.
kind of would do our advice around that. And there's certain types there. And then there's stratifications. They tend to be more beginner intermediate rather than intermediate advances, tend to be slightly newer to strength training, tend to have a little less experience, around that. So those are like our two biggest buckets of users or cohorts of users. And you could kind of map, and that's probably 70-80% of your entire membership basis. And then
Okay.
you've got these like pockets, the active aging 55 plus year old. That's a good 10 or 20%. Who what is training for life and nothing else. I'd argue a lot of the people in the other big buckets are just, they're in that bucket but not yet. They're
Right.
still working on something else before they get
Yeah.
there, but it's in their minds. You've got completely brand new to strength trainers and the way to do that. And so we do kind of cohort it out in the same kind of way, thinking about thinking about users, and then it's thinking about how they utilize the product and what features or products are going to think. It's not just the programming, right? It's relatively easy with our team size to be able to program for all of those different people.
Right.
We can release a program for this person and for that program with this and this and this, and then we have technology that adapts the weight and kind of personalizes it to them. Those are relatively easy. What is more difficult but more valuable is what are the additional product features that you might develop for a person in a particular cohort. So an example might be, hey, that first time beginner, I don't really care what that I do care what the programming is, but it's not, the programming could be anything. As long as
Right.
it's not too much, it's probably not bad. Something
Right.
is better than nothing most of the time. So, like, we'll build a program. We have some data that says we want to be increasing the time on tonal over about their first month of utilizing the device. We have strong correlation data that really resonates for long-term engagement. So if you started with 2 times a week at 15 minutes in week 1, in week 2, I want to make that 2 times 20 minutes, or in week 3, 3 times 15 minutes. A slight increment,
Right. Right.
increasing
Right.
engagement. Great for long-term engagement. What I don't want them to do is go out, do 60 minutes first training session, get a ton of DOMs, and never come back,
Yeah.
or come back like a week later after it subsides. That's a quick path to
Yeah.
non-engagement. So we utilize it how we're doing there, but it might also be like product features. Okay, well, on average, that person might be really engaged with badges and streaks, right? Give them some credit for, hey, you logged
Yeah.
3 workouts this week. Give them a badge. You logged your first workout on a Saturday. Give them a badge. Show them like, hey, you worked out 4 weeks in a row for the first time ever. Like, show them a streak. Like, what are the like nudge theory techniques to get
Yeah.
people on to the path? And so then you're talking about, okay, for me, that doesn't do a bunch, right? I'm going to train regardless because it's what I've always done.
Right.
So for me, as an advanced, build muscle male, I'm like, okay, well, what's the latest way I can manipulate load? We can do accentuated eccentric loading at the touch of the button, or chains at the touch of a button. I don't have to load up a bar and a platform. I'm all over that. I love that. I've seen athletes do it. I've done it a bit in the gym, but I'm not really like, I'm not super strong, but I'm
Right.
reasonably strong. I'm like, oh, okay, add some chains to my deadlift. That's pretty cool. And those are the features that I might develop then. So it's thinking about what features are going to kind of align to which customer type, and sort of mapping that out. Some crossover, but some are very, no, this is aimed for you.
Right. 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 The let's talk about. So we talked about the commercial, the tonal. Do you have something um, that like a practitioner could use in his studio?
Yeah, so we like it's the same hardware, same unit, but we have, I don't know, hundreds, probably not thousands, hundreds of personal training studio clinics, things like that,
Okay.
that utilize it. More like one-on-one small group. We're not going
Yeah.
into a big box gym, or
No. No.
you're
No.
not going your Alico clean and jerks to a tonal in a college weight room. That's not the space that we play in. But
Right.
certainly personal training, smaller group class gatherings. Yeah, so we have a number of installs, multi-family unit houses, condo complexes, corporate gyms around that. Uh,
Say this one would be just you know one practitioner training athletes one or
yeah,
two at a time.
totally. It's a great space saver. Like at its worst, which I don't want to say, but at its worst, it's the best cable column you've ever worked. In that
That's
it's not Kaiser high speed. It's better than a free weight high speed, but it's not. You're not doing your Kaiser high speed motion movements, but it's essentially 360 degrees. You can attach any attachment to it. It's like weight on, weight off with a Bluetooth button. 1 pound increments or decrements in weight. You can add these dynamic weight modes like chains and eccentric. So lots of individual personal trainers will
okay.
use that. And the way that we see it most common is, the athlete or the consumer can only come into the coach once
Right.
or twice a week,
Right.
right? I can only do it once, but I need them to train 3 or 4 times a week to get the adaptations. And so what they tend to do is they have a tonal in the gym, which they tend to use as part of an entire program. There might be some cleans and jerks and barbells and other particular specialized equipment in the gym. and they do that once or twice a week. And then once or twice a week, they get to train at home. The coach can program for them from their phone, and it just loads up to their tonal, and then they can go and kind of do their extra 2 time sessions a week at home on their tonal, so you get that extra kind of engagement. And so we found that to be like probably the best way or the most engaging. It doesn't take away from the practitioner's in-person time. It actually maximizes it, because they're okay, well, we can show you some stuff, but we don't have to worry about you getting this additional work, because I know you can get home and do it, and it's going to track all of the data, so I know what you actually did.
Right.
um,
See, that's one of the things, as I've matriculated through this profession, that I've always concerned myself with, because I've been given homework for years.
yeah
Hey, go home and do this. Hey, record it here. Sometimes you get compliance, sometimes you don't. Hey, do this. Hey, do it's always been just, did they do it? Because it surely doesn't look like it when they come in here.
yeah
You know what I mean? But do you really want to beat up a client?
yeah
Sometimes, but you also want to try to encourage them too. Like, look, dude, if you don't do this, then
yeah But like what I've found, and like I've been fortunate. Like most of my career has been at the top end of elite sport, where most people are fairly dedicated and do the work. And
right,
then generally there's a coach around, or I can send a coach with them to do the work and kind of check in. But like in the times that I have done, like say developmental athletes, or those that are maybe not at the tippy point of the
right.
spear, like compliance is it's
That's
an
a big
issue.
thing. Yeah, it's a big
Like
thing.
we
I,
don't need the advanced training. We just need you to turn up consistently and do stuff.
I,
And ways that we can kind of help ease that. I think one of the things the tonal that makes it easy is it's really quick to get in it's really easy to do a 10 or 15 minute workout and get some productivity out of it. It
right,
doesn't need to be a 45, like touch of a button, no loading on plates, one exercise to the next exercise, no waiting for equipment. Like literally you can do a full workout in, depending on what your goals are, but you can get a lot of work done in 10 to 20 minutes. And so you can accumulate that. I do a lot of quote unquote exercise snacks. I'll go in, I'll do a couple of sets in between a Zoom call, and
yeah,
then I'll go back to do work. And so it allows you to bridge in these additional pieces, which essentially just allows me to be more compliant. Because if I had to dedicate 60, 90 minutes, I could do that once or twice a week, but I'm not
yeah,
doing that 4 or 5 times a week.
yeah. That starts to get difficult. The Listen, man, I would love to keep going, but it's about time to wrap up. But let me ask you one more question. This one will be simple. Any advice for young practitioners coming into the fold, so to speak?
Um, I think, like, I'll be honest. I think it's a lot harder now than it was when when I started out in this space. There was only 3 jobs, but there was only 5 people applying for them. So
Right.
there was
Yeah, I
it was
got you.
there was not a lot of people. Like the fact that I'd done an internship almost guaranteed me a job. It's a different space now, right? There's a
Yeah.
lot more jobs, but there are a lot of people that are applying for them. And so
Oh
I
yeah.
feel for the practitioners that are coming up right now, because it's really hard. And as someone that's reviewed thousands of resumes, I hate having to make some tough decisions on
Yeah.
really limited information. It sucks. You could be
Yeah.
great, but because it didn't hit this box in one letter that you like, it's tough on both sides.
Yeah.
Um, I My advice would be, like, you have to be good at academics. Like, you
Yeah.
can't get away from that. Like, the system is what the system is. You could argue whether it's actually needed to have a master's degree to become, but that's the reality
That's
of the
what it
world
is. Yeah.
it's the reality of the world we operate in. You might as well function in that rather than trying to buck it, in my personal opinion. Like sometimes now you need PhDs just to get an entry level job. That
Yeah.
sucks. I don't think it's needed, but it is the system. And if you want to be successful in the system, like someone told me, the fastest route from A to B is a straight line until there's a bunch of blockades in the way. So
Yeah.
how do you circumvent the blockades?
Exactly.
Um, and so I think you have to be good at that. Then obviously that's not enough. It's how do you get relevant practical experience, because that shows through to a team that you want to work with and a team that will accelerate your growth. I think you want to get practical experience as much as possible in the field, and that can be with whoever it can be with. Right? You can start real low. I was fortunate. I got to work with the British Olympic swim team as my internship. That was
Yeah.
not the reality now. But US Ski and Snowboard still offers a summer internship. It's only 5 places. But like, most of the people that have done that have gone on to MBA level, either work for ski or snowboard or gone on to
Right.
MBA, MLB type level jobs across the industry. I think you have to find those opportunities. And then I think you need there's a fine line that you have to walk between having an opinion and stating that to stand out and being relatively not very knowledgeable and very
Yeah.
outspoken.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how you walk that line, if you can walk that line, that will make you stand out once you get in front of someone better than anyone else. Like I can name 5, 6, 7 people I've hired, and the reason that I hired them is because they had an opinion, but they coaxed it in a way that not seem like they know it all with just a graduate degree and 1 year's experience.
Right.
And that's the space where you have to like coax it in that, like, I believe based on my experience, this is what happens. But I'm open to other ideas.
Like I used to tell my daughter, and she's a grown woman now with her own child. But I used to tell her, you can speak up.
Yeah,
Be careful how you speak up.
yeah,
You know, don't just come in here screaming at dad, because that's not going over well,
yeah.
even if you're correct.
Yeah. It is, and I have many examples over my years of people that came in, had all the ideas, but just because they wouldn't shut up about them, I would have never have employed them.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have functioned in my team, even if you were right.
Yeah.
And then I've had people come in and like, you did all the stuff, but you never really showed me anything more. You just like
Yeah. You just
did the
did the
work,
stuff. Yeah.
and I it doesn't stand out enough. Unfortunately, in a competitive field, you kind of think, and so it's that fine line of have some opinions, share some of those opinions, but be really careful how you do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's how you, yeah, honestly, good people, like be a good person. How you want to
Yeah.
talk to, right?
Don't be a bonehead.
Yeah. Okay.
Troy, it's been great, man. I appreciate your time. Appreciate you dealing with our little snafu with the time and all that stuff. But
All good.
I look forward to talking to you again in the future and seeing what
Likewise.
you got going on.
Thanks
Ladies
so
and
much for having me on. Bye.
ladies and gentlemen, this has been Performance Talk. Our guest Troy Taylor with Tonal. We're finished.